meeting, so bear with me. So the meeting is now in order. The first order of business is approval of the minutes from February 16th. Any motion to accept from Gardner? Second from Representative Delperdang. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Now we'll open up the hearing on House Bill 2321, requiring electric public utilities to notify cities prior to construction of urban electric transmission lines. Nick, can you give us a review of the bill?
Certainly, Mr. Vice Chair. Good morning, committee. So committee, House Bill 2321, as the bill is drafted currently, would require an electric utility to provide notification to a city prior to beginning construction of what is defined as an urban electric transmission line within the boundaries of that city. So in the bill, an urban electric transmission line is defined as any line that traverses at least 2.5 miles through the corporate limits of a city having a population of 300,000 or more. And that line is designed for the transfer of 69 kilovolts to 230 kV of electricity. So under the bill, prior to construction of one of these lines, the utility would be required to provide the city all preliminary construction plans, visual examples, showing the proposed locations and dimensions of all poles and supporting facilities relative to the streets, the intersection and site triangles at those intersections, easements and public rights-of-way. This notice would be required to be provided to the city by the utility at least 6 months prior to the construction of the line. The bill would also provide statutory authority for a city having that population threshold to exercise zoning or siting jurisdiction and with authority or control over the construction of that urban electric transmission line. And these provisions would not apply in situations where the construction or repair of one of these lines is necessary due to damage caused by any natural causes or other physical damage to the line. And Mr. Vice Chair, I understand and know that the committee received a proposed balloon amendment, and I'd be happy to address that at the appropriate time. But that is what the bill currently does, committee, and I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Nick. Are there questions for the reviser? Representative Keither.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Nick, with the definition of the size of the cities, approximately how many cities would that incorporate in this bill?
That's a good question. I don't know the exact answer to that. I mean, you think you're bigger, those are your bigger population centers, certainly. But I don't know the exact answer to that.
Okay.
Not too many though.
I mean, you know, what's good for the goose may be not good for the gander. I mean, I don't know. I think, anyway, thank you.
Other questions? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to follow up on the previous rep's question, I'm thinking 300,000. Is there any city other than Wichita? And I don't even know, is Wichita proper itself? Obviously the metro area is, but I think Wichita falls into it. But I don't know if any other city in Kansas is that large.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. I don't know the exact answer to that, but we could certainly find out city population sizes of, you know, I'm thinking, is Topeka that big? Any city in the Kansas City metropolitan area?
No, people think Kansas City's real big, but it's a mixture of, you know, all of the towns, the Shawnee Missions and Olathe and Lenexa and all them, but they're smaller communities put together.
Certainly, we can find that information out for you guys.
Other questions for the reviser? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to. Sorry. Our first proponent is Representative Gail Finney, representing the 84th District. Welcome to the committee.
Can you hear me now? Today I stand here in support of this bill, House Bill 2321. For some of you, I'm pretty sure most of you have probably heard about our big polls in Wichita, Kansas. But for those who haven't or who's new to this committee, a few years back in the summer and fall of 2018, there were like over 50 large, huge transmission line poles, towers put up in our community, and some of them were put into the actual front yards of some people. And so at the time, most of the community was unaware of what was going on. And when we found out, they had already started construction. So a lot of the people in our community were very upset about it because it really has left, it looks really ugly in our community. And it's about 3.1 miles through a regular neighborhood community. So over the last couple of years, I had introduced a bill prior to this. It was 2317. And it's just basically asking for some accountability from the electric companies to at least notify the neighborhoods before they do something to this magnitude to a neighborhood. And so it took this is like I guess you'd call it our third year working on this. But we finally sat down and came to like a negotiation of, we want to just make sure this didn't happen to another community, at least have people be aware of it. And we want to make sure that a community be able to see what those poles look like before they were installed. So this is the version of this, and as he described, at least this version, it will give opportunity for the cities to be aware 6 months in advance. We'll be able to see what what they look like ahead of time, and the notification has improved. There would be notices sent to households that were within 660 feet of the diameter. I forgot exactly if it's the diameter, but, and they will also be able to know ahead of time through the DAB board and our zoning board within the city, and they'll get a chance to review it in much more detail and be able to communicate with the utility company. And so also it'll give a little more notification to the landlords and to the tenants, and they will be able to have an open house ahead of time for the citizens to be able to view the plans and to ask questions of a KCC, a Kansas Corporation Commissioner, and a staff person from the KCC. So basically, this is just a combination. And one of the things I want to mention is that we had already talked about a balloon amendment. And so some of the people that's from my neighborhood and district, they'll be talking about the overall of the amendment that we had talked about. And what the amendment does is where we got the 300,000 and the last paragraph of the current bill, we had revised that because what had happened, I got to the deadline of the bill when it had to get turned in the last day for an individual. And so I had just came up with some wording because I hadn't had a chance to, we couldn't finish our communication, so I turned in the bill, but we want to revise that last paragraph of the bill. And so I visited with Evergy and Evergy's different staff members, Laura Lutz and her, I guess you can call her management. And so we came up with some better language. So like I said, I stand in support of this bill, and I stand for questions if anyone has one. But what I meant to say is that some of the people that will be testifying today, they'll be testifying on the agreed negotiated language that I wish the revisor had mentioned the balloon, because that would be pretty pertinent to what we're talking about right now, because some of the people will be talking about the combination of the balloon and this bill.
Excuse me. Are there questions for Representative Finney? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you just, maybe I'm reading it wrong, but in your testimony toward the very bottom of the first page, it talks about electric transmission lines with 69 kilovolts, but not less than 230 kilovolts.
Is your mic on?
Yeah, it's on. Hello? Yeah. I'm just,
Maybe.
okay.
Thank you.
I'm just trying to get a clarification on that statement.
Previously, the previous bill and what Evergy had proposed was 115 kilovolts but not less than 230 kilovolts. And 69 kilovolts, I asked to have that put in there because that is the kilovolts that were in the poles that we had installed in our neighborhood.
Do you really mean not more than 230? I mean, I can't do 69, but not less than 230. It's not making sense to me.
Laura, can you answer that? On the 230, not less, the language that was in the bill?
Chairman, am I reading that wrong or?
Hold on just a second.
Okay.
I'll recognize Representative Delperdang first. He had to follow up.
Yeah, it was just a question of, am I reading that wrong or
That,
pulling on your background where it says transmission line was 64K, but not less than 230. I mean, how do I have 69, but not less than 230? That's the part I'm kind of grasping on.
well, I guess the range would be between 69 kilovolts to just under 230 kilovolts.
So then not more than 230.
Not more than, I mean, that's why I'm
thinking this is,
yeah,
I just
that's
want
why I'm kind
clarification on it.
of, that's why I'm reading it, but maybe,
Not more than 230.
yes,
Okay.
yeah.
I just want to clarify. Okay. Thank you.
That is?
Any other questions for Representative Finney? And Representative, do you have a meeting to get to, or are you able to stay for
I'm
the?
able to stay.
Okay, so if there's additional questions, then we might be able to call on you.
Okay, sure.
Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Berquist.
Thank you, Representative, for being here. Do you feel that this bill in its form with these amendments will be satisfactory to the community?
Well, I think some of them, of course, they would love to have those posts removed, being honest. But I think it's a good first step. Our main thing is we want to make sure that this didn't happen to another community. And I think if it could propose, at least going through our city and having some accountability there, I think it's going to be much more helpful. And the 300,000 threshold, that was proposed by Evergy, and I know for large cities like Wichita, it's going to be very helpful.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Yes. And I showed that Reviser has his hand up. Nick, do you have some information?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So firstly, Eric Sartorius with the league sent me an email with city population sizes. The only city that's larger than 300,000 is Wichita. I think the next closest is Overland Park with 191,000 people. The other issue I wanted to chime in on after hearing Representative Delperdang's question, the language in the bill reads, with regard to the line size, transfer of at least 69 kV, but less than 230 kV. So the way the bill is structured, I guess it would not capture any 230 kV line. It has to be less than that.
Any other questions for Representative Finney? Nope. Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question. I'm not familiar with the incident that occurred back in 18, but as I read the testimony, you know, you're saying you were blindsided. Evergy's saying that they contacted owners and tenants, anybody that could see or would have a property. I'm just curious of why the disparity of one versus the next, I guess, as I read testimony. Thank you.
Well, I think they went to property owners, but we were concerned like the people that live around that area, people that are directly impacted, even though you may not have a pole in your area. It might be across the street from you, but it's still going to impact your property values. So the community as a whole wasn't aware, but the people that were directly impacted, I believe they were notified. But when you see the poles 3.1 miles, it impacts that whole community. I mean, they look like towers. I mean, if you can imagine 105 feet towers, you can't miss it of driving through that neighborhood.
Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I was wondering, Mr. Vice Chair, if we could have Nick go ahead and go through the balloon now before other testifiers, please.
I was kind of thinking the same thing, because I just wanted to ask Representative Finney, so the other three proponents that are speaking would be referring to that balloon amendment?
Yes.
Okay. Could we have, Nick, are you prepared to brief us on that balloon amendment?
Certainly, Mr. Chair and committee. Excuse me. So committee, what the balloon amendment would do, first, if you have the balloon in front of you, it would strike, or the bill, it would strike the provisions of subsection D. First off, that's the subsection that, excuse me, that allows the city, or that was allowing the city to enact some zoning and siting jurisdiction over these lines. So it would strike that allowance. The next thing that it would do is the balloon language, essentially. It would require an open house to be conducted. And notice of this open house would have to be sent out to all landowners and tenants of record who are within 660 feet of the center line of that easement where the proposed line is to be located. It would also require notice of that open house to the city and to the State Corporation Commission. The utility would also need to publish notice of the open house in a newspaper having general circulation in the city. And the open house would need to be conducted. And this open house would allow landowners, or needs to allow landowners, to provide public comment regarding the proposed construction. The open house would be required to have a commissioner and a staff person of the State Corporation Commission in attendance at the open house. And it would be required to be held on a weekend day or after 5:00 p.m. on a weekday. All the other requirements regarding the notice of the plans to the city and things of that nature would still be required as well. But I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Nick. We do have a few copies for those here in the committee room that do not have a copy of the balloon amendment. The committee members were provided electronically the balloon amendment from an email from Barbara. And we're going to try to get it displayed on the screens in here. Hopefully we can make that happen, but they're working on that now. So Ms. Lutz is passing it out to those that might be interested in here in the committee room.
And Mr. Chair, this is Nick. I can share my screen with that balloon amendment on if the committee would like that.
Sure. Yeah. If you got it, Barbara. I think Nick's going to be able to do it. Nick, if you can go ahead and, yeah, there we go. Okay, thank you. It's on the screen now here in the committee room. I think everybody here in the room's got either on their laptop or the hard copy. So you have the amendment. Are there any questions of Nick on the amendment? All right. So, oh, excuse me. Representative
My
Smith.
hand's up.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I didn't see Representative Carmichael.
Are you recognizing Representative Smith or me at this point?
Excuse me, Representative Smith first and then you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, when I look at this, we had big lines going in southeast Kansas, and it says they'll open a open house for people. But I saw, you know, huge telephone poles putting in people's front yard. And I'm thinking, you know, yeah, they'll be able to comment on, hey, I really don't like this, but do they have any real say other than just saying, I really don't want this going through my neighborhood? Because some of those lines were, were huge. And I would think it would be, I know if I was a homeowner in that area, I wouldn't like it at all. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Smith. I think maybe when the other conferees come in to speak, then maybe you could ask that same question if you'd want to of them. But Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Myers, the stricken language in the balloon, what would it actually, would it allow cities through zoning to stop what Evergy did to this community?
Yeah, so that stricken language was granting statutory authority, as you can see in the language, to exercise zoning and siting jurisdiction, authority or control over the construction of an urban electric transmission line. So there was a grant of statutory authority to exercise siting jurisdiction there.
Would that have allowed a city council to say, no, Evergy, you're not going to build these towers and destroy this neighborhood?
I don't know, Representative Carmichael. The only thing I can say is this allows a city to exercise zoning and siting jurisdictional control over those lines. So I through those zoning ordinances and that control, I presume the city would have some additional say in those situations.
And so instead, we're taking away the city's authority to control the siting of these 110-foot towers, and instead giving the residents an open house hosted by Evergy. Is that what this does?
Well, just remember that that subsection D is not in current law. So under the bill, yes, this is removing that provision, that proposed new provision that would have allowed that zoning and siting jurisdictional control to be exercised by cities. So it's removing that proposed new language, but that language is not current law right now.
Okay, but so to finish up, Mr. Chairman, make sure I understand this. I'm talking about the balloon amendment. And the balloon amendment, I think, Mr. Myers, takes away the city's authority to stop projects like this and substitutes one of Evergy's milk and cookies open houses. Is that what it does?
The balloon amendment would just add another requirement to conduct an open house. I don't know that it speaks to any other authority that the cities have with regard to regulation of the public right of way. It just requires that for these specific lines, in addition to that notice that the utility would be providing under the bill to cities with the specific plans, there would also need to be an open house that allows public comment. So it's just.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we're in a circular argument. I'll try it with a conferee later. Thank you.
Other questions on the amendment? Representative Delperdang.
Just a curiosity question. Are we hearing the bill or are we working the bill?
No, we're just hearing it. Yeah.
I've never seen an amendment come up during a hearing.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah, but we're not voting on the amendment. We're not,
Okay.
but Evergy will be talking to the amendment.
Who offered the amendment, if I could ask?
It was going to be in Evergy's testimony.
So it's an amendment offered by Evergy then?
Yeah. It was an agreed upon amendment with
All right.
another conferee, so.
Thank you.
Other questions for Nick? Okay, we'll continue on with proponents then. Next, and this will be virtual, is LaWanda DeShazer from Wichita. Welcome to the committee. I hope you're on. I can't tell for sure. Yes, I see her.
I am
Okay.
on. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Again, I'm LaWanda DeShazer out of Wichita, Kansas, and I'm here to give testimony in support of House Bill 2321. And also I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but also the proposed amendment. And one of the things that happened in Wichita was when the poles were, well, the transmission lines were installed. Yes, Evergy did make the rounds, but they didn't provide full disclosure of what they were actually going to do. And I know this because my mom actually had a house in that area that was affected. And so, and she actually lost her property through eminent domain, but, you know, Evergy did pay her for her home and all that, but she had to go to court, and it was through eminent domain that she initially was in the process. And when Evergy, again, made the rounds, they didn't show 105-foot poles, transmission lines are going to be installed. They made the owners and tenants feel like, oh, we're just going to remove the old wooden poles and replace it with newer poles. And so the information was given, but not full disclosure. And so that's why I do think House Bill 2321 is a great first start. It will give more oversight. It will give citizens more notice. But if you put in the amendment, it gives, you know, a little bit more teeth to it, because that's the problem. There were open houses after the fact, but there was no teeth to it. And so it didn't really matter that there was an open house. The people, the citizens had no say moving forward or backwards in the process. And so if we could add some more language, the 300,000 population, as you guys just saw, only affects Wichita. And if you're doing a bill, it should help everybody in the state of Kansas, so that no other neighborhood has to deal with something like that. And so that's why we need to not restrict to only 300,000 cities with that number of citizens. And then also, one of the things that happened as well is that landowners were talked to, but a lot of the homes were rented out. And so the tenants, found themselves being displaced because the homeowners maybe said, okay, we're cool with it, we're fine with it. But then the tenants were the ones that had to move. They were not compensated. They were, you know, put at a disadvantage. And so we have to make sure not only landowners know what's going on, but the tenants as well, because again, they all are members of the community. And allowing the city to have a say in it would, again, give another layer of protection to the citizens. It won't stop the process, but, you know, it gives citizens a say in what's going on. And then having the Kansas Commission involved, again, that's where the teeth can come in, and perhaps the city zoning departments can have some teeth. Again, just having an open house and putting out letters to people with no power behind it, point. And so again, I do think House Bill 2321 is an awesome start, but I think we should give it just a little bit more teeth so that the citizens actually have recourse and not have to wake up one day and look out their window and see a 105-foot pole in their yard or their neighbor's yard. Thank you.
Ms. DeShazer, are there questions for the conferee? Thank you, Ms. DeShazer. We're moving on to the next conferee, and that will also be virtual. It's Dr. Glenda Overstreet Vaughn. And if you're I forgot to mention this at the start, if you're representing a group or association, if you'd mentioned that at the start of your testimony. Thank you. Dr. Overstreet, are you
Yes.
muted? Oh,
Good morning.
okay.
I was
Good morning.
muted. Thank you. Thank you to the committee. My name is Glenda Overstreet Vaughn. I'm here testifying on behalf of the Kansas State NAACP. And if you don't mind, I'd like to take a small moment for a personal privilege to say that I am also a native of Wichita. I grew up in the area that was affected by the poles. And I can recall one summer, I think it was summer before last or last summer, taking my grandsons to Wichita to visit relatives and showing them the area where I grew up in. And I was really taken aback to see these poles. They were so big. My grandson at the time was about 12 years old. And the first thing he said was, Nana, who would do something like this? And that really just took a tone with me, because as a 12-year-old kid, to see the image that these poles have in the community was really truly devastating. And so while I am here representing members of the NAACP, I also represent those that are within the community of which I grew up in. I'll say that I'm here as a proponent for House Bill 2321 because I believe that that Representative Finney has done a very, very diligent job in working with the community, working with Evergy to try to bring together some agreement with how things should be done moving forward. That doesn't, I would be remiss, however, if I did not say that to be put in a position for the neighborhood, for the areas to be put in this position was really disingenuous. And for that particular piece, I think that by putting together a bill like this, it would help to add some degree of accountability and protection for other cities as well. I'm currently living in Topeka, and Topeka is by no means 300,000. I think we have, our population is anywhere from 120 to 125,000. Yet I'm hearing that there's going to be a similar move in the neighborhood of which, in the district of which I live. So that concerns me greatly. And so therefore, putting forth something like this really helps us to be able to have some beginning guidelines for dealing with energy organizations that would be able to put forth these types of polls in the neighborhood. So I would look at it from that standpoint, as far as the population being, considered, at a different level where we could be all inclusive with respect to the cities. Also, I think that it's important for the residents as well as the city council to be able to have input in the future installation or involvement of poles that will be going up. I know that the terminology is lines, urban electric transmission lines, but no, they're poles. They're big poles. And many people in the community also said that they're big ass poles. So with respect to that, they're just they're overwhelming. And so I know that there was a gentleman that talked about, how the neighborhood, that he would be upset about this. Yes, there are a lot of people that share that sentiment and more, very upset about this. But we also see the diligence that our legislator is putting forth to try to at least address this in some way. And for that, we are standing in agreement with this bill as a beginning step towards full accountability. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Overstreet Vaughn. Questions? I see one from Representative Keither.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's good to see you.
Thank you. Same here.
You raised some interesting points that, the definition of the city. You're talking about that perhaps happening here in Topeka that you're aware of? Did I hear that?
That is correct.
Where in Topeka?
I know that they have engaged in communication with some of our legislators. And right now they're looking, I know it's going to be probably around 2022, but they're looking at over in the second, over near 10th and Golden, over by the Ripley Park area is where they're proposing.
Okay.
And so I immediately called and spoke with my representative. So he has assured me that they really have made the company accountable in a number of ways. We just want to make sure that there's some minimal guidelines that can be met, at least to ensure that we're not faced with the same dilemma that my hometown area is faced with. That's just not going to work. So with respect to that, yes. So this is not just a Wichita issue. It's now becoming, a Kansas issue, because we're seeing the spread of these polls.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that
You're
information.
welcome. Mhm.
Other questions from the committee? Not seeing any. Thank you, Dr. Overstreet Vaughn.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Our next conferee is Mr. Brandon Johnson, and he is virtual as well. Mr. Johnson, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee, for the opportunity. I stand before you all today, not just as a council member representing the area that was impacted, but Vice Mayor of the City of Wichita, and on behalf of the City of Wichita in support of this bill. There were some questions earlier I want to give some insight to and also add to why we support this. So just to give some context, in late summer 2018, the issue with communication was, again, as one of the conferees said earlier, Evergy spoke to a neighborhood association and a district advisory board, but they didn't have all of the details of the new standards of what that meant, how that was going to change, or visual images of what was going to happen. So the surprise in which Representative Finney and I both got several calls, and I remember that afternoon, these huge base steel poles were being installed. These huge holes were dug, these bases were put in, and people immediately said, "What is this?" And the reason they said that was, one, they didn't know that this was coming. It was going to look like that. It was going to be that big. Two, for some of the land owners, they hadn't communicated with tenants that this was coming. So it caught a lot of people off guard, including myself, who was also in the district advisory board meeting and one of the neighborhood association presentations, because I hadn't seen this. So that began the communication issues that are trying to be addressed with this bill. And the reason why we support it is you give us a 6-month window to really look at the details that will be proposed. We're able to, as a municipality, and I'm sure other municipalities around the state could do the same, but we can work through our Metro Area Planning Commission to make sure that they know, those are appointed by council members, as well as the district advisory board of the district that will be impacted. We can make sure all of that public comment and minutes are put together. And by requiring that open house and having an actual, in the balloon amendment, an actual member of the KCC being there to hear from residents, they will hear directly from the folks impacted, whether they like this or not, or whether there's recommendations or not. This is powerful because another thing Evergy did to address some of the issues is the open house that they had. Folks showed up and said whether they wanted wooden poles or steel poles. And we were able to get some movement on that just based on public impact. So the people who are impacted truly care, but never saw an opportunity to really give insight because they didn't know what was coming and they didn't feel like they had any control over that. This bill is a really good step in that direction. Again, having those opportunities to give that first impression, feedback directly to not only Evergy, but to us as elected officials, as well as the KCC who has final oversight. Those are great steps to take, and this bill does that. And again, another addition, as was mentioned earlier, is notifying tenants. Those tenants deserve to be notified as well. We received, when I have a nonprofit that's on that transmission line, we received a letter. If we would have had a house there or someone else, it would have been on us to let those individuals know that was coming. We didn't see that. I mean, we've got an issue with out-of-state property owners that may have received notification from Evergy, may have agreed, but then never told their tenants. So this bill goes a step further to make sure that tenants also can receive notification. And because of this, again, I know that we'll definitely get input because folks don't want to see what happened anywhere else. Another thing that we wanted to make sure of and what this bill does is KCC involvement for accountability. again, having one of those commissioners show up and hear directly has been good. I see a lot of new faces on this committee. Representative Finney and I did a tour of this actual route, and we invited folks to go with us and see in person how big these towers were, hear from neighbors, and then we had a discussion about it. Having someone from the KCC see this type of thing and hear that discussion firsthand is powerful. It lets them know this is not something that's in the best interest of the neighborhood. So when they do have a decision to vote on whether something like this can happen, they can take that direct input from the community into consideration as they're voting. And again, bill's not perfect. We all work together on this compromise. Representative Finney, Evergy, and myself with some input from the municipality. There were conversations about that 2.5 mile length going down to a mile. This length still would have been impacted by this legislation because the route in Wichita was 3.1 miles, and this says anything 2.5 or more. So it would have impacted it. But we did have those discussions. We had a lot of the discussion that some of you have brought up today. But this is where we arrived. And again, we are supportive. It's a good first step. And on behalf of the city, we are supportive. And I guess one last nugget is back in 2019, the entire city council at the time and the entire county commission had signed a letter to Evergy, basically asking, for removal of those poles to something that would be more aesthetically pleasing to the neighborhood that was still up to the new standards, in which Evergy did receive that, and I think members of the committee did as well at the time. So with that, I'll stand for any questions about this bill or the process or support of it.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Johnson. Questions from the committee? I have one from Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry that I'm in a shadow right now. If I turn around, I can see my face. Councilmember Johnson, I really appreciate the work that not only Representative Finney has done on this. It's been exemplary. But as when the original bill was being prepared, that you consulted with the city law department concerning what could be done to give local authorities some power over this, not just a matter of, hey, we're going to do it, but also the ability to tell Evergy, no, you're not going to do this. But when I see the Evergy amendment, it looks like it was adopted. It would take away all of the power of the city to do anything about this. Is that a good idea? And if so, why would it be a good idea to take away the city's power as provided in the original bill to stop desecration of neighborhoods?
Thank you, Representative, for the question. So I can't say it's a good idea. It was the compromise from the conversation that we had. We have been talking about local oversight of these utilities, which MAPC and District Advisory Board does a great job with zoning here. This is another thing that the community could have some say in. And we were talking about trying to do something on the local level. What our legal team found was that state law would have prohibited us to have any real jurisdiction over that. And so we had, in talking with Evergy, they felt that KCC was the best group to have oversight statewide. And that's where that amendment came from. Locally, again, we vote on things zoning wise. The DAB can approve something or deny it. The MAPC can approve something or deny it, and that changes what the council can ultimately do. If there's 2 denials, a supermajority of the council would have to override that to approve it, which means 6 of 7 would have to actually approve something to make that happen if both groups deny it. So that gives better oversight here with zoning cases, and that was what we had originally proposed with this.
But the Evergy amendment takes all that away, doesn't it? It means the city can't regulate this. All you can do is watch. Is that correct?
Yeah, that amendment allows us just to have those public open meetings. We will use our ability to keep those public records with District Advisory Board and MAPC and submit that firsthand testimony. And that's the best we can do. This bill, the balloon amendment, would have a KCC member there so they can hear it directly, but that's about what we can do as a municipality.
I honestly think we could do more, but I appreciate your work, Councilman.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Vice Mayor Johnson? Seeing none, thank you, Vice Mayor, for being with us. We'll move on to, I just want to point out that there are 3 written-only pieces of testimony from David Nickel with CURB, Barbara Johnston from the Lawrence branch of the NAACP, and Jean Klein from Lawrence, Kansas. There are no opponents. Neutrals, we'll start with Mr. Bruce Aiken from Evergy. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman and the committee. My name is Bruce Aiken. I'm Vice President of Transmission and Distribution at Evergy, and I appreciate the opportunity to appear here today before you and offer information about our transmission projects that we've been discussing in Wichita and comment on House Bill 2321. You do have my written testimony that describes a bit of the history, and as obviously we've had some discussion here to get some history this morning as well. We do appreciate the proponents' willingness to work with us over the last few months to find common ground on this piece of legislation, which we believe addresses the concerns of the community and the city of Wichita and expands expands opportunities for urban communities to offer input on transmission projects that sometimes occur in heavily populated areas in Kansas. And as we've seen this week, transmission reliability is certainly important to all of us. Many of you on this committee are aware of this project that we're talking about, so I won't go into a lot of detail there. But I can tell you this, we have learned a great deal from our missteps in this project. We take full responsibility for what we did there and what we can do better. And with that, since that time, we've listened to the input from the community, the citizens, the lawmakers in that area, and we've incorporated that feedback into our processes and procedures. And in fact, we've made changes to those procedures. We also took feedback and made some adjustments on that line that we're talking about there in the Wichita area. There was a comment earlier about the line here in Topeka that's being rebuilt and the things that we've learned from this project in Wichita. We did invite local legislators and city council people to a tour of that proposed line just in the last couple of weeks. We had good participation from that, got some feedback, and again, we will do open houses and get additional feedback on that as well. So while this is a legislation provides, a better communication and so forth, we have incorporated that into our process for all transmission projects across our footprint. The type of infrastructure improvement like this is clearly disruptive to the community. As we rebuild our infrastructure, the structures are going to be bigger in most cases than what we're replacing because the standards have changed from a safety perspective. If the voltage is different, the amount of space between the ground and the first line, the amount of space between the conductors has changed from what the requirements were 40 or 50 or 60 years ago when the original lines were built. House Bill 2321 adds some certainty for residents, neighborhoods, and elected officials that they will have a voice in the process on transmission siting and construction. In closing, I would like to thank Representative Finney, Wichita Councilman Johnson, and the Northeast Wichita community for their input and willingness to collaborate on this. We were working diligently the last few months to agree to the language in advance of the legislative deadlines. However, we understood Representative Finney's need to get the bill introduced, and should the committee decide to work this bill, we did agree upon an amendment that we've discussed earlier that addresses the details of the community open houses and strikes the language concerning the siting authority and approval. I'm happy to provide that amendment if so needed, but that concludes my comments, and thank you for your time, and pleased to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Aiken. Are there questions from the committee? Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Aiken, thanks for being here. couple of questions. Do you have, the bill talks about 69 kV up to less than 230 kV. Do you have any 230 kV lines running through cities? And let me continue. Those are regulated by the Corporation Commission, correct? So how does that process work? You're going to run a 230 kV line and you go to the commission. Is the local city involved at that point, or are they completely left out of the decision?
Yeah, the reason the limit is set at 230 is because the KCC does have authority for 230 and above lines. I can't tell you specifically where we have 230 in a metropolitan area or not, but obviously they're coming to that city at some point to serve the load. So we would go through that process, but that would not change our process from a community standpoint and communication standpoint with the community and landowners and so forth. That process we will apply across the board.
One follow-up, Mr. Vice Chair.
Go ahead.
There's been, I represent Topeka, and in my area, we've had some of those lines down Fairlawn over the last few years. I guess my question is, would you be okay with lowering that standard from 300,000 population to a lower level in this bill?
The compromise to this bill was the 300,000. Obviously, as you lower it, it just provides additional administrative burdens, from just a total project standpoint, from an exact timing and so forth. So our ask is that it stays at 300,000, but I can tell you that our process that we're going to use is going to be the same across the board.
Thank you.
Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Aiken, the original bill offered by Representative Finney, I think you would agree, would give cities authority over the siting of these lines through their planning and zoning process. Is that your understanding?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Okay. But the Evergy amendment takes that away, does it not?
Yeah, and as I believe was said earlier, and I can't speak to the legalities of it. I think it was Councilman Johnson commented on that. But yes, our proposal does not include city approval of that.
Why does Evergy oppose giving cities zoning authority and planning commission authority over your activities, just like they would anybody else? Why do you oppose that?
Well, we've got a reliability or an obligation to serve our customers, and we have to do it safely and reliably. And we have a number of requirements that we have to meet, whether it's from the Southwest Power Pool, whether it's from National Electric Safety Code, and so forth. And so there are numerous things that govern how we build our infrastructure, and we just don't see an additional need to have additional approvals within that process.
Again, now, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Again, with the processes and with this amendment and the open houses, we will take feedback from local community members and incorporate that where we can in our construction of these lines. We obviously, there's a lot of folks that get impacted by these construction projects, and it's difficult or next to impossible to make everyone happy, but we try to incorporate what we can and make adjustments to the construction so that we meet our obligations and are a better community member.
Now, as I understand it, the KCC does have siting authority over lines of 230 kV and above. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But for the lines we're talking about here, the lines that are under 230 kV, does the KCC have siting authority? Can they stop you from destroying a neighborhood like you did in this instance?
I do not believe they have siting authority.
So the original bill would give the Planning Commission siting authority. The Evergy amendment would take that away. And lines in excess of 230 kV, the KCC has siting authority. So who would have siting authority, other than Evergy, of course, over the lines less than 230 kV, like the ones in question here? It'd just be up to you, wouldn't it?
No, not at all, Representative. We are going to take this community input and we will make revisions. We have done that in multiple cases. And certainly, I don't like being here today testifying on this behalf and don't like the fact that we've taken a number of people's time and a lot of people in this room's time dealing with these issues. So there is, this process has had a significant influence on our processes going forward.
But sir, with respect, Representative Finney's bill gives siting authority, regulatory siting authority, governmental siting authority over these lines, and Evergy's amendment takes away any governmental authority to stop Evergy from doing what they did to Representative Finney's neighbors. True?
It does take that away. Now, ultimately, a regulatory body has to approve us to recover those costs in rates.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Representative. Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, this is focused on the neighborhood itself. Can you tell me on those lines, what is the specific voltage they're running?
That line is operated right now at 69,000 volts. It was built to a standard to operate at 138,000 volts because as we were looking into the future and look at the total the energy supply in the Wichita area, we see a need in the future that we may need to have 100 more power delivered through the community. And so when we build these lines, they're up for 50, 60, 70, even up to 100 years. And it was more economical to build it at that higher standard now than to tear it down in a few years and rebuild it.
Okay. So, and I've noticed looking through this bill 6 times, it talks about transmission lines. Can you maybe explain to the body here, what's the difference between a transmission line versus a distribution line?
Yeah, so probably the easiest way is think of the transmission line as an interstate highway system that's bringing a lot of power to a community, to a substation. Once it gets to that substation, then distribution lines then go out from that to actually serve individual homes and businesses in the community. But the transmission system is the bulk power system that flows power to the community. And as we saw earlier this week, if you have any disruptions to that bulk transmission system, it can have cascading effects on your total power grid. That risk is much smaller, less impactful from a distribution standpoint. But that's why we are rebuilding our transmission system to make sure it's able to provide the power needs of our customers.
Okay. And a distribution system is typically maybe 4K to up to 69, right?
Typically 12K, 12,000 volts and below.
Okay. So what's running through this is truly not a distribution system. It's a transmission system going through the neighborhood, which we see on main thoroughfares. You see it cross country, but are there other neighborhoods that have seen this type of transmission line going right through their front yards?
Yes, I mean, example was mentioned earlier here in Topeka. I mean, the substations are where the load is. So you've got to have substations in communities. Sometimes they're in residential areas. And so as we rebuild those or have to rebuild the transmission line to get power to that substation and to that neighborhood, they do go through residential areas.
Okay. Would it be fair to say the transmission lines have a greater EMR associated versus distribution?
I'm not an engineer, so I don't know that I can answer that question.
What I was going to ask is, do you or does Evergy have any gossing specs available for this specific neighborhood?
I don't know the answer to that for sure.
Is it something we could get a follow-up
We
on?
can find out, yes.
Because I'd really like to see those. So, thank you, Chairman.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, I have a couple, Mr. Aiken. We've kind of walked through this new proposed notification process, but can you kind of step back and what's the current process used when you're trying to notify the public on these kind of transmission projects?
It is essentially the same as what we've outlined here, to give notice not only to the landowners, to the tenants, to the neighborhoods, being more proactive, to make sure the right people are involved. Like I said, we did have some open houses, some meetings in Wichita. They were not very well attended, so that should have told us we got to do a better job of making sure the committee or the community knows what's going on. We did a very poor job of explaining, all right, this is what the new structures are going to look like. So we've incorporated that into our processes going forward, that, all right, we're going to replace this, but this is really what it's going to look like going forward.
Second question is, and you had mentioned this just a little bit ago, you talked about the standards that have changed well, I guess within the last few years. Who changes those standards? Is that something that comes from the commission or Evergy or?
Generally, it's from the National Electric Safety Code is what drives that.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Aiken.
Thank you.
Next conferee, neutral conferee, is Leo Janos with the KCC. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Vice Chair Shriver, and good morning, members of the committee. I'm Leo Janos. I'm the Chief Engineer for the Corporation Commission. And I wanted to explain what the KCC role is in this type of a siting. You notice in the bill that it applied to 300,000 populations, which is going to be Wichita, and it's at least 2.5 miles long, between 69 kV and 230 kV. Now, the KCC does have siting authority for lines that are above, or 230 kV and above, but only for those lines that are at least 5 miles long. So there would be a segment of line in here in which we would not have siting authority. That would be from the 2.5 mile up to 5 miles. So that there's a piece of line that still is in a area where it would not be affected by this bill or by the siting laws that we have. Our siting laws are found in 66-1, 177. And what we do in a siting hearing, we do have hearings in the community. The commission is there. All parties get a chance to talk, and then it's a balance, right? We try to balance the reliability needs, which are always present when these projects come up, but we also balance that with where the line's located, and are there ways that we can tweak it a little bit to move it somewhere? But it's also the cost, because that's, in the end, those three things have to come together. So there are other areas that you have to remember also, that the KCC does not have siting authority for any voltage, and that's going to be for any line that aren't public utilities. We had spoken at a meeting a couple days ago about same kind of voltage lines that are served from wind farms. We don't cite wind farm lines, and we don't cite lines for municipalities either, regardless of voltage. There are other requirements. We get what are called EL notifications, or electric line notifications, under our wire stringing rules. And that's any electric line, distribution or not. They give us a notice when they have to rebuild that or change it. But those regulations only apply to lines that are built outside of the city limits. So lines that are inside of city limits, where they're moved because of road construction or just simply a rebuild of a line, we don't get those type of notices either. If I may, I'd like to mention the amendment as well, because it does bring the KCC into the picture there. And it's requiring a commissioner and staff to attend the meetings. We have always attended meetings if we're requested to, if we can. There will be some scheduling problems, just from experience, I know, trying to schedule a meeting for commissioners to attend. You'll need every bit of 6 months to figure that out sometimes. So that could be an issue. Also, I would point out, I'm not sure what our role is in that meeting. We certainly would attend, and we did attend the one that was in Wichita, the post event that we had here not too long ago. And I think we did serve as a sounding board, ability to talk to people, to give them our perspective or our way of looking at things. And obviously, Evergy's listening to what the commission is saying. They're very good about that as far as communicating with us. But in the end, Evergy has the right of eminent domain underneath Chapter 17618, which was written back in the 1860s. And KCC only has authority to influence that right of eminent domain over those lines that are at least 5 miles long and 230 kV or more. And that's where it is. Our influence is there informally, but as a mandate, it's not. And I think that's important to remember. Now, we should be part of the conversation, and we do. Any city that requests us to attend a meeting, I try to get there, or one of my staff does. So we will continue that always for any kind of situation, even for utilities we don't regulate sometimes. That's all the comments I have. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Any questions for Leo from the committee? Representative Carmichael.
Chairman, I appreciate you being here today. As I understand what you're telling us, sir, under the Evergy amendment, the KCC, a commissioner would be required to go to an Evergy open house, but the commission wouldn't have any authority whatsoever to stop Evergy from building a line like they built through Representative Finney's district. Is that correct?
I would not say, first of all, I should preface this, but in this job, I'm not an attorney, but is a common phrase that I use. So I'll start off with that. But I would say that, the overall mandate of the commission is that a public utility provides sufficient and efficient service. That's very broad. And that can influence a lot of things when it's considered. So I would not say that the commission has no influence, but specifically on deciding where a pole gets placed as a question of eminent domain or damages and how it looks is really only, I think, specifically spelled out in the line siting rules for 230 kV and above that are at least 5 miles long.
And if we were talking about 230 kV and above and 5 miles long, what could the KCC do to stop things like happened in Representative Finney's district?
I'm going to say that you would look, first of all, at is the line needed? That's going to be a big part of this discussion. If that line is used and useful, it's going to provide sufficient service, and it's doing it at an appropriate cost, then you balance that against the right-of-way for the line. And a lot of times, unfortunately, I mean, no one wants this in their backyard. I don't want this in my backyard. There's going to be times when it just has to be built there in order to provide the service that we've all got acutely aware of in the last few days.
But the KCC in those instances would have the authority to tell Evergy, no, you can't put your line in people's front yard. You need to put your line, for example, down the Redbud Trail, the old railroad right-of-way that's within 100 yards in some instances. You can, balancing the interests and the financial cost, you can, for 230 kV and above, at least 5 miles long, you can tell the utility, no, you can't put it there, you need to put it over here.
I think in both cases, you have to raise it to the level of, is it providing sufficient and efficient service? It all comes back to, how is this going to attach the public? Could we do that? as a commission, could the commission make those type of rulings if they found the line was just totally not needed? They certainly could do that under their authority today, I think. It's very clear they would have authority to reroute a line underneath the siting rules if it came down to that. But only then could they do that if it was for sufficient and efficient service. You can't arbitrarily, as a commission, decide that we think this line ought to go somewhere else. You have to have a reason for that, or it's not going to stand up in court, in my opinion.
Well, I'm a lawyer, but I don't practice utilities law, so I'm not going to try to render an opinion either. I appreciate your time and thank you for being here.
Welcome.
Any other questions from the committee? Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as I listen to answers, it seems like the answers are about siding lines. This was a rebuild. I'm just clarifying what my understanding is. This was a rebuild of a line that apparently had been there for 50 years, correct? And
it was a line, but when you say a rebuild, it wasn't a like-for-like replacement. It was, the line was moved. It was larger poles, different poles. You can even argue they weren't that much larger, but they are bigger, different structures, different configurations that were put up, and they were moved closer to a house, as I recall, to get into private easement versus being in road right-of-way. Not that those streets were going to widen, which would make them move their poles on Westar's or Evergy's dime, but in that road right-of-way, it's very congested in any urban area. You've got water, sewer, electric, telecom, all of them are competing in that road right-of-way. So to get into private easement gives you a little bit of breathing room for any kind of future construction. Now, when your private easement is very narrow, because these front yards were actually very small and the structures are large, then it became an issue, and I think Evergy has addressed that today.
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, we have one other neutral conferee, but written only, and that's from Leslie Kaufman with Kansas Electric Cooperatives. There is no fiscal note on this bill. And we had the balloon amendment passed out earlier. I'll close the hearing now on House Bill 2321, excuse me. And as a reminder to the committee, for next week, our last 2 days before turnaround, on Tuesday, we'll have a hearing on House Bill 2381, and on Thursday, we'll have final action on bills previously heard. So you might want to go back and look at those bills that we have had hearings on. So anyway, anything else for the good of the committee from anyone? Oh, Representative Berquist.
Unnamed, but a representative from Wichita has a birthday today, and I'll just let you figure out who it is. And it's not me.
Is he virtual?
Not me, Mr. Chairman, but gifts are still welcome.
It's Mr. Carmichael.
Yeah, it's representative from West Wichita, somewhere in the.
Oh,
Okay.
well, happy birthday.
Now, our chairman brags that he's from West Wichita.
Moving on.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Gardner.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to point out we have a representative from Topeka whose birthday is today also, Representative Bourgeon. So, yeah.
Must be. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. And I want to thank all the conferees today, both virtual and in person. It was good testimony. I appreciate all of you sharing your thoughts and concerns on this bill. With that, the meeting is adjourned.